we have attempted to show you, to let you hear, to let you see, and let you experience a mere fraction of that terror. Of course, seeing a masked man in a well-lit courtroom right in the middle isn't quite the same as seeing 2 or 3 of them come storming into your living room through a smoky haze. Hearing the voice of a child describe how terrified she was when she thought there were robbers in the room isn't quite the same as hearing your baby screaming across the hall.
I need to object to the violation of golden rule here.
I don't think that way you're disregarding the reference to
Yes, sir, I'll try to. Hearing Mr. Digristine hearing his child crying across the hall and screaming in terror is nothing like seeing a sweet little 9-year-old girl sit there on a videotape and say, I was scared. I thought there were robbers in my room. I didn't believe they were police. And I screamed, and my sister screamed, and we cried. Seeing some smoke billowing across the parking lot is a poor substitute for having a bomb blow up just a few feet from you and shake your world apart. Now, we heard testimony concerning Lonnie Stone, Joanne Digristine, Charles Digristine, basically being jolted out of their skin. Lonnie Stone thought he was going to die. He thought it was over when that stun grenade went off. And you only saw a fraction of it. But you heard that noise, you saw the smoke. And I submit to you that you can take your common sense and consider what it would be like to have your walls shaking, to have the walls shaking around, to have the flash, the blinding flash, the incredible noise only a few feet away. We read and hear about bombings in Lebanon, Ireland, faraway places. We sure don't expect to hear about a stun grenade being intentionally thrown into the home of a family. It's very, very difficult to imagine. The idea that a mother of 3 children could be forced to the floor in her own kitchen. The idea that a mother of 3 children could be thrown to the floor of her own kitchen with handcuffs while she helplessly listens to the screams of her 3 children is a terrifying one indeed. The thought of Charles Digristine hearing his beloved wife and his beloved children screaming in terror is one that's very, very difficult to imagine. We did our best. We wanted you to see the whole truth concerning how these events affected Mr. Digristine, because the state, to some extent, I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, is not forthcoming with what the judge's instruction will be. The judge is going to instruct you that, yes, indeed, you are not the people who decide whether or not this was a legal search warrant or whether the officers acted legally. You don't get to make that decision, and we don't pretend to tell you otherwise. On the other hand, you do get to determine How? The battering ram? The stun grenade? The costumes, the masks, and the smoke could have affected Mr. Charles Digristine's state of mind on that night. That is in the judge's instructions. It is a part of the judge's instructions, and the state knows it. The evidence that was presented wasn't just done for theatrics. It wasn't done to draw a big crowd. We're doing the very best we can to try to assist you in understanding, assist you in experiencing, again, only a small fraction of the terror felt by this man on that night. We did our best, and we hope that it was good enough for you to understand that. Now, the judge will instruct you concerning self-defense, the justifiable use of deadly force, and while Mr. Bausch wants to call that legal mumbo-jumbo, ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you that that is the most important issue confronting you today. The most important issue confronting you today is whether Mr. Charles Digristine reasonably believed that his actions were necessary to prevent serious bodily harm to himself, serious bodily harm to a member of his family, or the commission of any other felony in his home. And some of the other legal mumbo-jumbo that I expect Mr. Bausch isn't real excited about you hearing about is what some of those felonies are. That Mr. Digristine could have reasonably thought were being perpetrated in his home. And I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to listen very, very carefully to those instructions. The most critical element is what would the defendant, what did he reasonably believe? What could he reasonably believe? What could he reasonably believe when he heard his door breaking down, an explosion in his living room, his wife screaming, his bathroom window being broken open? What could he believe? When he went to the hallway and looked down and saw people with masks, what could he reasonably believe? You must consider what Charles Digristine heard, what Charles Digristine saw, what Charles Digristine thought, and what Charles Digristine did. The sequence of these initial events is critical, I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen. He heard the crash at the door. He heard the explosion. He heard Joanne screaming. And he heard the window breaking in his bathroom. And we know that no one has said anything else, but those events all occurred within the same few seconds. No one has said anything different than that. Now, Brian Guilford wants to tell you that Mr. Digristine was halfway down the hallway when he came through that living room in 3 steps. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that if he was halfway down the hallway, he could have never known that his bathroom window had been broken out. The only way that he could have known that his bathroom window was broken out is if he was in his bedroom when it got broken at almost the same instant that these people were busting down his door. And the state obviously has in their possession a voluntary statement that Mr. Digristine gave to Detective Mutter on the night that this assault on his home occurred. And yet they are unable to show you any time that he related that sequence in any other way except for the way we just described it. he was in his bedroom. He had to be in his bedroom because otherwise he would not have known about his bathroom window. And he told them that night, and he's never said anything different, and he told you that from the witness stand under oath. He told you that, and it's to be believed. We have to focus on that consistency, the consistency between what he said then, what he says now, and the critical importance that plays in timing of these events. Because we know what Brian Guilford says. We know he says he crossed that living room in 3 steps, 3 strides across the living room, and it's not a very big living room, you saw it. Mr. Digristine had to be in his bedroom when that bathroom window was being broken out. He's told you as honestly as he can about what occurred that night. He's told you that maybe he stepped out, he remembers going to the door, he remembers looking down. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, the state did not show repeated denials of that. I think perhaps someone may have forgotten to ask him the right question that night, but the state did not show you repeated denials of that. What did Charles Digristine see when he looked down his hallway? Well, he told you. He saw the fronts of 2 dark figures with masks on. Masks. Not your friendly officer's hat with a little emblem on top. Masks, ladies and gentlemen. And I submit to you that we know, because at least in this respect, the officers were consistent in their testimony. We know that Officer House, Barry Williams, and Brian Guilford came in first in some order. And they were targeting an objective bedroom. And whose bedroom was that? Joey Digristine, the 16-year-old son of Charles Digristine, the first bedroom on the left. And so those 3 men who came in first, and they've all been consistent about that, those 3 men who came in first were facing toward the hallway as they came down the hallway. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that regardless of how big any letters concerning Titusville Police Department are on the back of a shirt, if someone's coming toward you, you can't see it. They weren't backing down the hall. They were in the living room, and they were coming toward the hallway. And I further submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that a pat on the shoulder is not visible from a physician face on face. Madonna Digristine's testimony is not inconsistent with anything that Mr. Digristine said here. What she said is, from my bunk bed, I can only see about this much of the hallway. And what I saw was my daddy's back. And my daddy had a shirt on and a pair of pants. I saw my daddy's back. She didn't see her daddy's side, as she would have if he would have been running down the hallway into that bedroom. And she didn't see him without a shirt on, which interestingly enough, in his first statement, Officer Guilford mentioned no shirt. No shirt. Now, I guess the state expects us to either forget that or assume that in the calm, cool atmosphere that occurred after Mr. Digristine realized his family was under attack, that he just decided to put on a shirt. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that's an incredible thing for them to expect you to believe. The clothes that these men had on are critical to this man's state of mind. There was not anything that could readily assist him in identifying through the smoke and haze that these were in fact police officers. And I further submit to you that the very presence of the mask is such a terrifying distraction that if they would have had anything, it could have easily distracted his attention from that. That mask told Joanne Digristine that these people coming into her house were terrorists. That mask, those masks, told Madonna Digristine that these people coming into her house were robbers. I submit to you that it is not in the common experience of us. Perhaps it is on Miami Vice. Maybe it's on Miami Vice. But we don't think about police officers wearing masks. No one does. And Mr. Digristine didn't that night. And he thought his home was being invaded by somebody who was going to hurt him, going to hurt his kids, going to hurt his wife. And he was terrified. And he told you he was terrified. And I submit it is not at all difficult to believe that he was terrified. What did he hear? What did Charles Digristine hear? Well, he called it something. He called it jibber-jabber. He said he did hear a little bit of a word here and there. He heard get down. He heard hold still. And most importantly of all, and I submit to you what any person would focus on under the same set of circumstances, he heard his wife Joanne screaming. And that's what he focused his attention on. And Barry Williams told us, well, I understand that. I had two little girls screaming across the hall, screaming hysterically, crying hysterically, and I didn't hear them at all. And I've been very consistent about that in my statements. I've never heard those little girls. And why didn't you hear those little girls, Officer Williams? Well, I was concentrating on something else. The officers were fairly consistent in talking to you about coming into the house and shouting, "Police, search warrant, get down." Now, I'd like to encourage you to try a little experiment. Now, you won't have a mask back there to use, unfortunately, but I'd like you to appoint one of your number when you go back to be the listener. You can be the listener, and of course you won't be terrified because the door wouldn't have just been busted down and a wife wouldn't be screaming in the living room. But I'd like to encourage you to appoint one person as a listener and have the rest of the people shout, not in unison, "Police, search warrant, get down." You don't have the mask to muffle it, but I think that you'll get the idea that what that poor listener is going to hear is going to sound a lot like jibber-jabber. It's going to sound a lot like nothing at all. It's going to sound a lot like, I believe Lonnie Stone used the words, loud mumbling. Who knows what they're saying? These officers weren't shouting in unison like a choir. They didn't have a director up there saying, okay, 1, 2, 3, let's everybody shout. They didn't have that. They all started shouting at different times. And then we hear not only didn't they shout in unison, they started shouting other things. Mr. Williams, Officer Williams, started shouting, "Arrest team, arrest team." Not "Police search warrant, get down." Brian Guilford said that despite his training that everybody shouts the same thing at the same time, he said something completely different when he says he confronted Mr. Digristine in the hallway. Joanne Digristine was screaming. She was screaming her head off. First she was just screaming, then she was screaming, "My babies, my girls, my kids are back there." And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that like Officer Williams had a focus, that was Charles Digristine's focus. His poor wife, what in the world could be happening out there? It's very telling that the officers themselves were handicapped in hearing and understanding what was going on that night. You heard Barry Williams testify that he went into Joey Digristine's room and shouted over and over again, "Arrest team, and he's wondering, where in the world is the arrest team? And does an arrest team ever show up? No. Mike Allen went to the door, looked in and thought, everything's cool here, I'm going to move on down the hall. And he was the designated member of the arrest team. Did he know what in the world Barry Williams wanted that night? No. we all realize, what you hear depends on what you expect to hear, what you are listening for, and what you are focusing on. What Chuck Digristine was focusing on that night was his fear. His terrible, terrible fear of what in the world was happening in his house. His wife screaming like he'd never heard her scream before. His children crying, screaming. These noises, he didn't know these noises. He'd never heard these noises before. These explosions. He had no idea what in the world was going on. He was focusing on his fear, the cries and the screams of his family, and he was focusing on his only hope, what he believed to be his only hope, a little gun. And I'm not going to minimize the gun. I'm not going to minimize the tragedy of an officer shot and killed. No one can do that. That would be so wrong. But that was Chuck's only hope that night, that little gun. His only hope of protecting his girls across the hall. His only hope of protecting himself from who knows who these people were. He told you he thought they were intruders. He told you he thought these people were a threat to his family, and I submit to you that anyone in his position would have reasonably thought so. He thought about a little .25 caliber gun that he had hidden in his room for protection. A gun he'd never fired. Charles Digristine knew that was his only chance, and he went for it. He went to get it. Now, Mr. Bouch, Mr. White, they want you to believe that this man would kill in cold blood to protect his son from a little drug bust. Ladies and gentlemen, that is incredible. We heard Charles Digristine talk about what he said to his son Joey. Joey, if they're come, I'm going to take him to your room, and I hope you get busted, because that's what you deserve. I don't want this crap in my house. That's what he said to his 15-year-old son Joey. Now, I guess he should have kicked him out of the house. I guess he isn't a perfect parent, but Mr. Digristine isn't on trial today for his parenting skills. And I submit to you that it's an awfully hard decision to make a decision to boot a 16-year-old kid out of the house when he's confronting this widespread temptation. It's not like we've never heard of teenagers being tempted by marijuana. It's not like that hasn't touched many of us in some form throughout.
I've got to object to this. This
You were
argument.
listening, John. Thank you. Charles Digristine told you what he said and what he did. And did the state bring in anyone to contradict that? He said, I said it in front of all my friends. I said it in front of all Joey's friends. Joey, if they come, if those police come knocking at the door, I'm going to take them right to your room, Joey. He told him he said that, and he said it, and they can't prove it. They can't prove otherwise. They know it. They know that he said that the night he was arrested, when he was confronted with this information about drugs, and they know he said it today, and they know he said it many times, and he never said anything any different. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the fact that this man could not control his 16-year-old son is not a reason to find him guilty of anything at all. Charles Digristine's room was dark, except the TV. He thought, I better turn off the TV, they'll see me. Unfortunately, when he reached for his gun under the table that you'll have in evidence, all the tapes fell off. The VCR fell off. It made a loud noise, a lot of clattering. And what did he hear? He heard, somebody's back there. Somebody's in that back bedroom. That's what he heard. He didn't hear police. He didn't hear them say police. He's struggling to put a clip in a little gun that he's never, ever used before. He's struggling in the dark. At some point, he hears his daughters. He also sees a dark silhouette run in front of his doorway. He knows they're coming after me or they're coming after my girls. I've got to hurry up. And what's his emotional state? How is he feeling? Have they shown that he was feeling anything other than absolutely terrified? He was terrified. He was terrified. What was going to happen to him? What was going to happen to his wife? What in the world was going to happen to his little girls across the hall? Suddenly, he hears an explosion just a few feet away from him. And again, the explosion in the parking lot, I submit to you, can be nothing like hearing that explosion in a 10-foot by 11-foot bedroom. You saw that bedroom. It's a little tiny bedroom for a master bedroom. We wanted you to see it. We wanted you to see where this took place. In the house that Mr. Bausch tried to tell you during opening argument is not a home. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can decide that for yourself. You can decide that if this man and this woman are living in that home with their children, and they tuck those babies in, and they make sure they say their prayers, and they put their little pictures up on the wall when they bring them home from school. Just because Mr. Bausch tells you it's not a home doesn't make it so. Mr. Digristine's back there. The explosion occurs. We know the effect that explosion had on Lonnie Stone, and we know how much it must have disoriented Mr. Digristine. It was right just a few feet away from him at the foot of the bed, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, there's a lot of the bedspread left. Mr. Bausch will tell you there's a bunch of it left, but I'll tell you what, there's a bunch of it in smithereens in those pictures all over the floor. Please take a good look at those pictures. Now, let's talk about these flashbang stun grenades. They're going to be in evidence, put in evidence by the defense. I guess the defense was concerned about this little warning. The state was concerned about this warning. This grenade is dangerous. Can cause serious injury or death. Not properly handled. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that throwing one of these and then another one of these into a bedroom where they didn't know who was in there. They already had their objective. They had 16-year-old Joey Digristine, the guy they thought was into the dope. They got him. They got him. He was tied up, handcuffed in his bedroom. They didn't know who was in Charles Digristine's bedroom. And they threw this device in there before any shots were ever fired. Submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that that's the use of deadly force, that Mr. Digristine reasonably believed that his life was in danger. He reasonably believed his children's lives were in danger. His wife's life was in danger. And in just a very few seconds, he had to respond. And I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, what is the most basic kind of human response? The most basic kind of human response is self-preservation and protecting one's children and family. That is the most basic type of human response. And he said the adrenaline was pumping. I'm sure it was. I'm sure he was on automatic pilot. Going over that bed, he's not a young man. He's 58 years old. He was terrified. He's never been confronted with a situation like this before. He was terrified. He jumped over that bed. He went for the gun. And, you know, if he would have had 5 or 10 minutes to think it over, and calmly and coolly consider it, maybe he would have decided not to fire it. But he didn't have that. He didn't have it. He was confronted with a situation in which he reasonably believed his life was in danger, and he reasonably believed that those lives of his family were in danger. I'm not watching the time. Now, it's important for you to consider this piece of evidence. This is a door. It's the bedroom door of Charles Digristine. And you need to ask yourselves whether the bullet pattern in that door is consistent with anyone attempting to mow down an officer because he might get the 16-year-old son who's doing some pot. Those bullets are scattered. They're scattered all over that door that was open at the time that the shots were fired. Mr. Digristine told you something very reasonable. I thought that they'd discover me with the light. I thought they'd take the light in and discover my girls. I was scared. I fired my gun. I don't really remember very well how it happened. I know they fired shots. I fired shots. I was terrified. It happened real quick. Now ask yourselves, ladies and gentlemen, would somebody who would have the gall to mow down a police officer to avoid his young son, a juvenile, from being busted for possession of some pot, would he do that? Come on. Doesn't he think, if he's rational enough in those few seconds to think that, oh my goodness, there's a police officer coming to have Joey's drugs, I better shoot him or else they'll find out about Joey and I could lose my house and my kids and everything else. Isn't he going to also think that if I shoot him, won't I lose my house and my kids and everything else? What they want you to believe is just incredible. And they can't prove it. They can't prove that that went through his mind. And they ask you to look at circumstances, but I submit to you that the circumstances completely contradict what they're attempting to make you believe. He was only 10 feet away from that door. 10 feet. And those bullets went all over the place. One tragically hit Officer House, and no one will tell you anything but that that's a tragedy. It's a terrible tragedy. There were 6 bullets. And you heard testimony, and I believe you'll see some photographs about where those bullets ended up. You'll see the door. You'll see where those bullets ended up going through the door. You'll see that 4 of the bullets went through the door and behind it. 1 of the bullets hit Officer House, and 1 of the bullets just went awry and ended up a little bit into the hallway. Now, this man wasn't a practice shot. A lot of you recall talking about shooting guns, target practice. That wasn't his kind of thing. He didn't do that. Never shot the gun. Had it there. He wasn't into guns. He shot this gun on 1 occasion. Now, it's very, very important that you consider the other physical evidence in this case. The state wants you to believe that this man was firing knowing he could hit his children. It was very clear from the testimony and from your opportunity to view where Mr. Digristine was standing. He was shooting at a 45-degree angle from the door. The bullets were going at the door. He was aiming for the light. The light was in his room. Now, we've heard about the submachine gun that Officer House was carrying that night with a Grindel light on it. We heard about that. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that a lot of things about the whole situation don't make very much sense when you consider the physical evidence. All of the officers, you're going to need a diagram to show the jury. All of the officers, with the exception of Michael Allen, testified that Officer House was to the right of the master bedroom door in the hallway, facing the wall, facing the south wall, when he was shot. I'll move you closer now to the said in a minute. First of all, consider if Charles Digristine, excuse me for stepping in front of you, was here, firing at a 45-degree angle toward the door, that there's no way that those bullets would have gone into his children's room, and he knew that. Consider the physical evidence that partly came to you from the state and partly from the defense concerning the casings and the bullets of Officer Steve House's machine gun. Now, 3 officers, Barry Williams, J.J. Moran, and Brian Guilford, told you that at the hallway that Officer House was here in a crouched position at the time that he was shot. And what else did they tell you? And it's very important to think about how much sense this makes. They told you that when he was shot, he fell backward, and his gun was firing as he fell backward. Well, I know some of you know what a submachine gun looks like. A submachine gun is a long piece of equipment, and we know that if Officer House was looking into this bedroom and he's right-handed and he's kneeling down, that gun would have had to be somewhere in front of him. And they're saying he got shot, he fell backwards, and that gun just fired. Ladies and gentlemen, what did Officer Carter tell you about where those bullets were found? You heard the testimony. There's a headboard of the bed right here. One of those bullets was found in the very corner of the headboard, and it penetrated the wall. And it was a few feet, and I ask you to rely on your notes, a few feet off of the floor. One of those bullets was at the same height, and it penetrated the wall. Three of those bullets were lower in the wall, and they went through Mr. Digristine's mattress. They were all at the same level. Now, ladies and gentlemen, is that consistent with somebody who's falling over, making his last attempt? Or is that consistent with somebody who does a sweep into a bedroom where he believes, rightfully or wrongfully, that there's a threat? Ask yourselves that, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the other very, very interesting aspect of the physical evidence is where the casings ended up. Now, 2 officers were questioned about where casings end up when fired from an MP5 submachine gun, and what they tell you? Go off to the right. That's what they told you. Ladies and gentlemen, the casings from Officer House's gun ended up in a pattern that is absolutely inconsistent with him being anywhere but advancing on the roof. We have a casing here. We have a casing here. Here's a casing. We have a casing over here. And we have a casing over here. Now, what's the strangest location of any casing that allegedly came from Officer House's machine gun? On a dresser, it stands more than waist level. On top of a pile of laundry, you have that other casing. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard this testimony come from Officer Carter. You've seen some of the pictures that tell the story. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that if this man was here and falling backward, as it's been testified that he was, it just couldn't have happened that way. It just couldn't have happened that way. Now, those of you who went on the view, all of you who went on the view, if you looked, you may have noticed that from this doorway, with the impediment of this closet, you would not be able to see that bullet hole. You wouldn't be able to see it. It couldn't have happened the way they say it did. Now, that's one way in which you must consider the testimony of these officers is, does it match up with the physical evidence that we know about? We know about that physical evidence. We saw it. We heard about it. We have pictures of some of it. Does it match up? And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, it does not. Now, the second way in which you need to consider the testimony of these officers, Mr. Bailiff. Thank you. Is to consider, have they ever said anything different to you than what they said to you on the witness stand under oath? Have they ever said something different when they've been under oath at another time? And are they saying the same things? Now let's talk about Mike Allen's testimony and talk about it in conjunction with the diagram I just showed you. Michael Allen said, no, he wasn't behind the wall. He was advancing on the room. He was advancing on the room, and he was in the middle of the doorway. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that that's the only way that these bullets could have ended up where they ended up. And it's the only way that the casings could have ended up where they ended up. And that Michael Allen is the one who's giving you the most honest testimony concerning that event. Now, we know, and common sense tells us, that these officers had to be very, very devastated the night that this tragic thing occurred. Certainly, they were crying. Certainly, they were shaken. Certainly, they were coming to grips with something that was most unexpected to them, the death of one of their fellow officers. And again, I'll never discount that. I could never discount that. However, those officers were sat down by Detective Michael Von Cannon, and they were told, tell me the truth, tell me the whole truth, write down here everything that happened. Now, you heard from the 4 officers that went back to the station that night with Detective Von Cannon. You heard each one of them testify concerning what occurred just prior to the entry into the home. And you heard each of them, except for, again, Officer Allen, testify that people yelled, police, search warrant, before they entered the home. Now, I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that you don't need a degree in English to understand the meaning of this question. As you approached the house, did you hear anyone inside or outside the house shouting or warning the people in the house that the police were coming? Officer Allen said, as he consistently said, no. Officer Williams, did you hear any warnings shouted into the house or warnings inside the house that the police were there prior to entry? No. And in his case, he said, no, I was trying to get to the backyard. J.J. Moran, did you hear any warnings shouted into the house, warnings inside the house that the police were there prior to entry? No. And Officer Buckner, did you hear any warnings shouted either into the house or coming from inside the house that the police were there prior to entry? No. These officers also, in 2 pages or 3 pages or however many pages it took them to tell what occurred that night, did not talk about anyone shouting police prior to entry. Now, who first said we shouted police prior to entry? Well, Officer Williams and Officer Guilford had the most horrible task of accompanying their friend to the hospital that night. And they found out he was dead, and they realized a lot of questions are going to be asked. A lot of people are going to look at what happened here. We've got to explain this to his widow, to the public, to our bosses. Gary Williams and Brian Guilford were the first people who ever said anything about police shouting prior to the entry. Now, Brian Guilford didn't hear anyone say, there's someone at the window. He didn't hear anyone warning there's somebody at the window. Officer Buckner was specifically asked, as you were approaching the house, getting ready to separate from the other members of the ERT unit, did you notice anyone? Did you notice anything spotting someone? Did you notice anyone in the windows? Or did you have any type, or did you hear any type of warning being shouted by other members that you had been spotted? Officer Buckner's answer under oath on the 22nd of February, no. His testimony from this witness stand under oath is yes, I heard it. Mr. Bowers calls these minor inconsistencies, petty inconsistencies, false issues. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that if ever these men had a reason to make this case get better, the death of Officer House gave them that reason. Now, there's something else that we have to talk about when we talk about Brian Guilford and his first sworn statement. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that you should consider his testimony with some degree of skepticism. Officer Guilford came back to that police department and he sat down. And what do you think, other than the devastating loss of his friend, what do you think would be the most important thing on his mind? Joey, the 16-year-old pot smoker? Joey? Would that be the most important thing on his mind? No way. And yet, he's asked the question. Tell me about the entry. And he goes into, I yelled, police officer, search warrant, get down. I heard other members of the team yelling it. The door's forced open. The grenade goes off. We go running in, and I go running into the bedroom of Joey Digristine. At that point, the tape's turned off, ladies and gentlemen. And then he says, Officer Williams, Officer House, and I were the first three in. I'm not sure of the order. We went into that bedroom, that objective bedroom, that bedroom of Joey Digristine, first door on the left. And we got our man, Joey Digristine, pulled him off his bed. And he yelled at us, and we yelled at him, and I cocked my gun, and I handed him off to somebody else. Okay, now just a minute. Let me back up. Now, you heard Officer Guilford explain that at some point there was a break in the tape because they had to, of all things, change rooms. They had to go somewhere else to discuss this. Well, we don't know who talked to Officer Guilford in that time between when he was describing the most important thing that had happened that night going into Joey Digristine's room and the time that he started talking again on that tape. We don't know what happened. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that it boggles the mind to think that the most important thing he'd have to tell that officer taking his interview is about going into Joey Digristine's room if the first thing he actually saw was this man who he believed killed his friend, Steve House. After the long interruption, after he finishes talking about Joey, oh yeah, by the way, there was this guy in the hallway, no shirt, long pants. No shirt, long pants. He was about halfway down the hall, and I saw him and I yelled, "Stop, police." By the way, I guess that's the guy that killed my friend Steve House, but by the way, that's all the importance it had to Officer Guilford that night. Thank you. Officer Guilford also didn't tell us about another what must have been, if it occurred, a very traumatic event. Going into the room of a 9-year-old child, 8-year-old child, and a 6-year-old child, and having that child jump onto his back, cling to his neck, scream piercingly into his ear, and come off of the bed with him as he moved to shoot into her daddy's bedroom. Now that's certainly something that I submit would stick in most of our minds, no matter how upset we're done. It's straw grasp. It's one of the reasons this horrible tragedy could have happened. It's one of the reasons why this friend, this beloved friend, is dead. He didn't grasp that straw that night. Just a few days later, in his next sworn statement. Now, the other straw he didn't grasp that night had to do with when a voice allegedly came out of that bedroom. A voice that he says now happened before any stun grenades were thrown. Are you the police? Yes, we are. Come on out. That night, he said, we moved down to the bedroom and we threw those stun grenades. The officer house threw those stun grenades in. Then, a little later, we heard a voice. Now, he also says, now, that it was a terrible scene. There were children screaming, there were children crying, there were children on top of him. And I know that we believe that to some extent, but what did little Madonna Digristine say about that? And I asked her, and I was pointed about it, and I said it in a lot of ways, because her little 9-year-old mind might not comprehend what I'm asking. And I tried to ask it a lot of ways. Did you hug him? Did you grab him? Did you touch him? Did you put your arms around him, Madonna? Did you go off the bed with him? How did you get down from the bed? I climbed down Tony's dresser. I climbed down Tony's dresser. That's how I got off the bed. Now, I know the state will argue that this was a very traumatic event and that little girl could be mistaken. It was a very traumatic event and Officer Guilford could be mistaken. It was a very traumatic event and a lot of people could be mistaken. A lot of people could be doing their very best to somehow justify this terrible tragedy by making their testimony better. Now, one thing is really important. David Buckner breaks out the window. He's the officer in the back. Mel Williams puts the fire extinguisher stuff in there, sprays it around. Now, where does Buckner go? Does he run away across the yard? No, he did not. He was right up there. He was closer to Charles Digristine than anybody else. He was right up there by an open window. He couldn't see through the window, the drapes were closed, the lights weren't on. But that window was open. It's never been disputed that it was open. And he was only a few feet away. And you know that because you saw the house, you saw the tiny confine of that bedroom. And you know that if anybody heard, are you the police? Coming out of that bedroom, David Buckner would have heard it. And he was asked, did you hear anything like that? Did you hear anything coming out of the room? I heard the grenades, I heard the shots. I didn't hear anybody's voice. Now, Officer Guilford wants you to believe that he, out in the hallway, down the hall, with the door closed, with Joanne screaming her head off, with the children crying and screaming, with Barry Williams hollering, arrest him, arrest him, arrest him, that he heard it. He didn't hear it. And on February 16th, 1989, he said something different. It may offend some people to think about faulting these officers after this tragedy. What I want you to think about is not who to blame. What I want you to think about is, could any of this happen the way they say? Officer Allen tells you that Barry Williams was right behind Steve House when Steve House lobbed that grenade in. So does Brian Guilford. What does Barry say? Barry Williams said he was coming out of Joey's room. Allen saw Barry there. Guilford saw Barry there. But Barry says he was coming out of Joey's room right then. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, it was traumatic, and yes, it's understandable that these officers would have a hard time. It's understandable that Mr. Digristine would have a hard time. I submit to you that that's the very reason why reasonable doubt exists in this case. They can't show you one bit of proof that this man would kill an officer to protect his son. We heard about the 1984 search warrant. What did he do? The officers came to his house. It was daylight. He let them in. He sat down at the table. He cooperated while they tore his house apart. And they left without finding anything, without arresting anybody. That's what Charles Digristine knew about search warrants. He didn't know about masks. He didn't know about bombs. He didn't know about coming in the middle of the night. He didn't have a right to defend himself and his home, to defend his family, to defend his home, that nobody does ever. You've been very attentive. You're the most important people in Charles Digristine's life today. We appreciate it. We know you took notes. We know you're working hard. We know this is a hard case. It's hard to walk through this group of people with the very difficult decision that you have to make. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, there's no other verdict other than not guilty. They might talk to you about manslaughter. It's not manslaughter when you're defending yourself and your children in your home. It's not second-degree murder. It is justifiable use of force. You haven't heard any evidence that supports their absolutely out-of-this-world theory that this man would shoot an officer to protect a little tiny stash of marijuana. You haven't heard it, and I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that that motive that they want to suggest doesn't exist. Thank you.
Departments nationwide. Hello, I'm Glenn Rinker. Thanks for joining us.
And I'm Michelle Morrow. We will have a live report from Titusville, but first, a horrifying story is unfolding in Daytona Beach tonight. A 26-year-old man has...
Tonight at about 9:30, it all ended. A jury of his peers found Charles Digristine not guilty. After 5 hours of deliberating, the jury's verdict was short and simple.
We, the jury, find as follows as to the defendant in this case. The defendant is not guilty, so say we all, the 16th day of August.
Defense attorneys showed feelings of happiness, and so did Digristine, who tonight, for the first time in 6 months, became a free man.
And it was just like a nightmare. It happened so fast. And I just, like I said, I feel bad. I feel bad. I should be happy, but I feel bad because I got to live with this the rest of my life.
It's a tragedy that the police officer died. The tragedy is that it could have been prevented if they would have just done an adequate investigation.
The verdict came as a shock to the Titusville Police Department. Chief Charlie Ball was obviously disappointed.
I expect that the officers, as well as myself, are going to be angry at the system for a while. However, we are professional and we'll press on.
Now, there's no word yet whether the Titusville Police Department will change its policy of using no-knock drug raids. But one thing's for sure, tonight's victory for Charles Digristine means he will most likely file a major lawsuit against the city of Titusville for the no-knock raid at his house February 15th of this year. Back to you.
Certainly not the end of it. Thanks.
That's right.
3 days of testimony.
Nothing wrong was found there.
Well, apparently they have found some evidence in Volusia County, but we'll be monitoring it.
That's right.
Thanks,
Spring Titusville police officer Stephen House during a drug raid at the defendant's home. He said he did it in self-defense, and apparently the jury agreed. News Center 2's Beth Powers joins us live from Titusville with details. Beth?
Andrea, there were a lot of tears shed tonight from both sides. For Charles Digristine, who's a free man after 6 months, and for Officer Stephen House, who died doing what he believed in.
The defendant is not guilty, so say we all, the 16th
After
day of
6
August.
months of uncertainty, it was finally over for Charles Digristine.
Please.
I'm relieved, but I still feel bad what happened that night. Because honest to God, I didn't know they were police officers.
Friends of slain officer Stephen House and his widow Cammie left the courtroom in disbelief. Some said the ending would have been different if the jury had been allowed to consider all of the facts about Charles Digristine and his drug-dealing son, Joey.
Nothing, of course, would have brought Steve back, but we know that he died doing what he believed in.
Back inside the courtroom, Digristine's family cried and embraced. His wife, Joanne, said it's time to put their lives back in order.
You know, it's never going to be forgotten. It's never going to be the same. But we've got to begin.
Digristine's drug-dealing son, Joey, said he was sorry for all of the pain he's caused.
Just using marijuana just ain't worth it to the family, you know, to your brothers or sisters.
Charles Digristine says he harbors no resentment.
I can't blame the police. We need the police. I got respect for the police.
What's next for Charles Digristine? Well, he says top on his list is getting his 2 children back from the custody of HRS, and he also says he hasn't ruled out the possibility of suing the city of Titusville. John and Andrea, back to you.
All right, thank you, Beth. Beth Powers reporting from Titusville.
Well, we are among the millions of Americans who are witnessing a spectacular show in the sky tonight.
Florida, as nature treats us to a sight we won't see again for 15 years. The lunar eclipse. We'll take you outside to see it in a moment. But first, Charles Digristine will remember this night for reasons all his own. After an emotional trial, the confessed killer of a Titusville police officer is a free man tonight. A jury deliberated 5 hours to find him not guilty. For more on that story, we go now live to Titusville and our Deborah Roberts at the courthouse. Deborah?
Marla and Barbara, the jury decided Charles Digristine fired his gun in self-defense 6 months ago in a police raid. That decision about an hour and a half ago set off a string of emotions.
We, the jury, find as follows as to the defendant in this case. The defendant is not guilty, so say we all.
It was a verdict 59-year-old Charles Digristine waited 5 hours to hear. He wouldn't be going to prison.
Oh, I'm so relieved.
Despite the relief, Digristine says it's hard to feel good tonight.
Because a life was taken that night. You know, and I got to live with that. You just can't forget about that.
Digristine's elated lawyers say there is a bigger message in the jury's verdict.
The police ought to do proper investigations and rely on dependable people before they go storming into anybody's house with these commando tactics.
While there was joy inside the courtroom, there were tears outside. Police officers felt they'd lost more than an officer.
I expect that the officers, as well as myself, are going to be angry at the system for a while. However, we are professional and we'll press on.
The dead police officer's widow wouldn't talk about the verdict. Instead, she immediately went into seclusion. Tonight, Digristine can move freely for the first time in months. His house arrest bracelet, which bound him to his home, is now but a memory of the family's long ordeal.
I still feel bad. What do you mean? What happened that night? Because I didn't know there were police officers that came in my house.
A range of emotions even in the Digristine home. As you could see, Charles Digristine looked pretty stunned by the decision tonight. It's been a very emotional ordeal for both sides on this case, and it probably will be a while before the city of Titusville heals from it all. Barbara and Marla, back to you.
So the verdict is not guilty. It was self-defense. Deborah, any indication on how much that unusual display of a stun bomb that the jury saw yesterday, the demonstration, played in their decision?
Well, the indication that we got, Marla, came yesterday just from the jury's reaction to it all. They all looked shocked and stunned by the loud noise brought on. So I think you have to probably guess that that had a strong impact on their decision, just seeing what that noise was like and what the smoke was like coming from that. No one said that for sure tonight, but I think we could read it on the jury's face yesterday.
All right, thank you, Deborah. Quite an emotional evening.
That's right.
Thank you. Well, people all over the world ventured outdoors tonight for a look at a rare lunar eclipse.